Now, I'm not sure about you, but every day when I hear stories like the one with Adidas and what they consider a swimsuit model, Target selling swimwear that you can tuck your package in for, things like the Budweiser, the Miller, all this insanity, I think to myself, how did we get so crazy? How did we just get to this place where gender mutilating care is common and we're encouraging more and more kids to have it? And now we're saying that 20-30% of the population's identifying as trans. How do we get here? Well, I have a theory, and I've been kind of pondering this for a while, of how the lockdowns and the pandemic were part of the ultimate goal or part of the plan or a device that helped us get here. And I'll kind of connect the dots for you. And anyway, feel free to share your thoughts. Maybe I'm off base, maybe I'm not. So pre-pandemic, if you think about it, yeah, there was this LGBTQ plus, and there was, all this stuff was going on. There was no doubt about it, but it certainly wasn't to the degree it was. We also had bodily autonomy. It was a concept that was pre-pandemic. It existed. But as soon as we entered into this pandemic, the COVID-19, the lockdowns and everything else, human rights or individual self-autonomy went out the window. Not only that, but there was this goal of locking people down. What happens when you isolate people? Well, people aren't designed to live alone. That for some people who are fragile, and a certain amount of the population is, they tend to crack. They just have a mental breakdown. And we're seeing coming out of this that, if you believe it, and I believe it's certainly true, the American Psychiatric Association used to call gender dysphoria a mental issue, just like bulimia and everything else. So we already know there was undercurrents of mental issues with people already, but the lockdowns helped perpetuate it further. Now, the other thing the lockdowns did is they were really effective at dividing people. They divided families, for instance, on how and the best and the most appropriate way of responding. There was families that were against mandated vaccination. They were against locking down, masking, all the stuff, while other members of the same family were pro all that. So what did it do? It divided families. The other thing it did is it also caused a disrupt or an upset in the flow of kind of capitalism of what we consider a work ethic. All of a sudden, we were rewarding people, well, not we, my taxpayers, each of us, through governments running deficits, of encouraging people to sit at home. We were rewarding people for doing nothing. Well, if you wanted to promote Marxism, socialism, communism, here you go. An apt way of doing that. And we mandated who was essential and who was not. Government got to deem your value in society. So if we were worried about a social credit score, effectively we were at the beginning of the implementation of that as well. So those things were all coming along. Then there was the education system, and the goal being is to, if you're going to have a populace that you're going to bring under control, you need to have them live in fear. What better than frightening children every day by masking them? Think about it. If you're a 5-6-year-old and you've only lived such a short life, and 2 years of that post 5 or 6 is wearing masks, that's the world you know. And you are now encouraging these children to live in a perpetual state of fear, fearing everyone around them, fearing society in general. And who can they trust? Well, their trusted teacher, their trusted government officials, people who genuinely care. And the people who didn't want them to be masked and all the other things, well, those were evil people. We could just divide them. So we now all of a sudden had the fact that you could be tolerant, but only be tolerant of people who agreed with you. Now, out of that also, another big sea change that happened was that big corporations like Amazon and other large companies like that remained in business. The Walmarts of the world and all of those sorts of companies, they were all good to go. And like I said, the online retailers were pretty solid, especially the really big ones. What did it do? Well, that caused the small mom and pop operations in small towns and small markets to crumble. There's so many small businesses that are now out of business, including restaurants, clothing stores, service providers, you name it. These businesses are now defunct. And if once everything opened, the challenge for those people was to get workers. Well, obviously the big corps could employ more people. They could offer online. They could offer different ways of employing people. Plus, they could pay more if they had to, where the small mom and pop operators who lost a whack of money didn't have the same access to the labor pool. And they were also forced to follow all these measures for post-opening, which obviously led to more costs and more infrastructure, forcing them to shut down. So effectively, we were able to dismantle small business, and small business is the one model that ESG is not really applicable to. See, big corporate behemoths are employed by thousands of people, lots of people work there, and to get a common ideology and mindset is very simple. But small business is the vocal opponent to it, just like a nuclear family is the opponent to all the madness. So effectively, with the lockdowns and the pandemic, we were able to cause division between families. So we were effectively able to work at destroying them. We helped destroy small business, which effectively couldn't take on the big status business kind of ideology. And government gained more control and finally had bodily autonomy over people. They were able to dictate what you could not put into your body. Now, that leads us to where we came out of all of this. Through that process, we also had kids who spent a lot of time on social media, even more than usual. And they were effectively, again, like I said, frightened to death, shitting their pants, worried that this pandemic was going to kill them. And who was their savior? Well, this big government behemoth who knew better, and all these medical experts who came out of nowhere. So out of this, now we live in the post world of COVID, and we have all this trans madness. So it was easy. These kids were slim pickings and easy pickings, really. And you think about it, and there was not much that could vocally stand up against it. You already had, like I said, a destruction of the family. You already had that division. You had kids trusting government. You had kids living in fear. You had adults living in fear. And we were told through the pandemic, and you'll remember, that you got vaccinated for the greater good of society. It was the loving thing to do. So that was a narrative shift that happened now. Now the loving thing to do is to let a child have gender mutilating care. It's the loving thing. So if you were opposed to the vaccine, you're just as wicked for opposing gender mutilating care for kids. That makes you just as evil. And that is effectively the narrative that's constantly being pushed. And if you disagree with any of that ideology, if you don't believe men can give birth, if you don't believe men can get pregnant, if you don't believe men should be competing in women's sports, well, you're just a nasty person, just like you were with COVID when you didn't agree with masking, you didn't agree with lockdowns, all of those things. You are just anti-science, and you're not loving, and you don't care about the greater good of society. You see, that's the goal. I mean, if you're going to take over a society, if you're going to fundamentally change it, you want to come back against all the things that could be the stops against the madness. What can do it? Family is obviously, like I said, the biggest one. The nuclear family is what stands in the way. These nuclear families also have small businesses. Small businesses are, like I said, almost like, think about it like a community, community hall, a place where people gather and, ideas are exchanged. And it is not like a big behemoth that has to follow. It can adapt. It can have its own independent thinking. So the goal is you have to crush them as well. And through all of this process, who has to come out with the greatest amount of control? Government. And when people seceded it over the last 3 years, the people that have this ideology they want to push, where they want to trans kids, change society fundamentally, change capitalism fundamentally, change everything fundamentally, they are on an all-out offensive attack against all those areas, and they're easy when you weaken them all. And through the pandemic and the lockdowns, that was the goal. It was sort of like, going the 11 rounds, softening up your opposition so that in the 12th round you could knock them out. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Maybe they're out to lunch. Maybe they resonate with you. I welcome and love to hear your thoughts on it as well. You can also follow me, like I said, on my Rumble and my Locals channel. Please check out some of my past videos. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so. And I will see you next time.